This isn't a story I'm proud of, but it is a true one. It's about how the ugliest day of my life became the thing that finally set me free. The plastic knife trembled in my hand, hovering over the top of the cake. It was a masterpiece, if I do say so myself. A ridiculously detailed three-layered Jurassic Park scene, complete with a velociraptor molded from fondant and a volcano oozing red-dyed caramel lava. My son Leo was staring at it, his 6-year-old face a perfect picture of awe, his friends a chaotic chorus of "whoa" around him. My ex, Mark, stood beside me, his hand resting on Leo's shoulder, playing the part of the doting father for the assembled parents. It was a perfect, sunny Saturday at Zilker Park in Austin, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a sense of peace. That peace shattered when a pristine, white Range Rover Velar crunched onto the gravel path nearby. A woman emerged, tall and blonde, poured into a crisp linen dress that probably cost more than my rent. She moved with the effortless confidence of someone who had never known a moment of self-doubt, and as she approached our little party, a smug, pitying smile already forming on her lips, Mark's face went rigid. This was Tiffany, his new girlfriend, and her arrival was the first shot in a war I never even knew I was supposed to be fighting. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The backstory is simple, almost cliché. Mark and I were college sweethearts, the golden couple of the University of Texas Business School. He had the ambition. I had the grades that helped him realize it. We were a team. He promised me a life of sun-drenched afternoons in a sprawling Westlake Hills mansion, a life where I'd never have to worry about anything. But promises from Mark were like smoke. They looked solid until you tried to hold them. After graduation, his ambition curdled into a suffocating need for control. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a beautifully curated accessory. The arguments started small, critiques of my clothes, my friends, my career choices. He wanted me to quit my job at a promising marketing startup to focus on our future. I wanted a life of my own. The breaking point came when I found out I was pregnant with Leo. Mark was ecstatic, but not for the reasons a father should be. He saw a child as the final, unbreakable anchor. That's when I knew I had to leave. I packed 2 suitcases while he was at a conference and moved into a tiny apartment in South Austin, determined to build a life for my son on my own terms. To my surprise, Mark didn't fight me. He didn't want the mess of a custody battle tarnishing his rising star image in the Austin real estate scene. Instead, he made a proposal that, at the time, seemed generous. "I'll handle the rent, Chloe," he'd said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "I don't want my son living in some dump. I'll pay the landlord directly. It's cleaner that way. It's the least I can do to make sure Leo is secure." It felt like a lifeline. I was a new mother, barely scraping by, and the offer of a stable home was too good to refuse. He found me a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent complex just south of the river. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. And for 5 years, the arrangement worked. A check went from his account to a property management company, and I had one less thing to worry about. I thought it was a gesture of goodwill, a lingering piece of the man I once loved. I didn't realize it was just the foundation of a very elaborate cage. Now, standing in the park, the smell of birthday cake and freshly cut grass thick in the air, I watched that cage door swing shut. Tiffany glided over to Mark, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. She didn't spare me a glance. Her focus was entirely on Leo. "Happy birthday, little man," she cooed, handing him a gift bag from a toy store so expensive I didn't even know it existed. "Mark has told me so much about you." Mark, the coward, just stood there, a pained smile plastered on his face. He mumbled an introduction. "Chloe, this is Tiffany." "Tiff, this is Chloe, Leo's mom." Tiffany's eyes, a cold, calculating blue, finally landed on me. She scanned my jeans and simple t-shirt, her gaze lingering for a moment on the smudge of blue frosting on my cheek. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "It's just so admirable what you do, raising him all on your own like this." She gestured vaguely at the party decorations, the mismatched fold-out chairs, the homemade cake. Mark tells me how much he helps you out. It must be such a relief not to have to worry about the big things like rent. The other parents shifted uncomfortably. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sharp. She was painting me as a charity case in front of everyone. A struggling single mother kept afloat by the grace of her benevolent ex. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. All the years of biting my tongue, of playing nice for Leo's sake, of accepting Mark's generosity, without question, it all boiled over. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. He doesn't help out, I said, the words tasting like acid. He still pays my rent. All of it. Every month. The silence that followed was absolute. Tiffany's perfect smile faltered, a flicker of shock and anger in her eyes. Mark's face turned a blotchy, furious red. Leo, oblivious, was just tearing the paper off his new, obscenely large toy. I had just lit a match, and I was about to find out that the entire world I'd built was soaked in gasoline. The phone call came 2 hours later. I had just tucked Leo into bed, the sugar rush from the party finally wearing off. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and Mark's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What the hell was that, Chloe?" he hissed, not even bothering with a greeting. "What were you trying to prove?" "I wasn't trying to prove anything, Mark. She came to my son's birthday party uninvited and tried to humiliate me. I just told her the truth." "The truth?" He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "You made me look like a fool. You made Tiffany uncomfortable. That arrangement is between us. It's private. It stopped being private when your girlfriend decided to use it as a weapon against me." I shot back, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't let myself feel in years. "Why is she even a part of this? Why would you bring her to Leo's party without even telling me?" "Because she's part of my life now," he yelled. "A part that you seem determined to ruin. You have no idea what you've done. You better hope you didn't screw things up for yourself for Leo." The line went dead. I stood there in my silent apartment, the threat hanging in the air. You better hope you didn't screw things up for yourself. It wasn't his anger that scared me. It was the specific, calculated nature of his threat. He wasn't just mad, he was warning me. It was the first time I realized that the monthly rent payment wasn't a safety net. It was a leash. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I half expected an eviction notice to be taped to my door. I checked my bank account obsessively, waiting for the child support payment he deposited to be late. But everything remained normal, which was somehow more terrifying. The silence was a form of torture. Meanwhile, Tiffany's campaign began. Her Instagram, once a curated feed of luxury travel and sponsored wellness products, became a gallery of her perfect life with Mark. There were photos of them at Uchi, the exclusive sushi restaurant I'd always wanted to go to. Pictures of them laughing on a boat on Lake Travis. A sickeningly sweet post about meeting the most important little man in his life, featuring a picture of the back of Leo's head. Each post was a carefully crafted dagger aimed right at me, a public declaration that she had won and I had been replaced. The captions were full of passive-aggressive hashtags. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag true love, hashtag leaving the past behind. I was the past. I was the baggage. One night, unable to sleep, I was scrolling through her feed, tormenting myself. She posted a photo of her and Mark having drinks on the balcony of his penthouse downtown. In the background, on a sleek glass table, was a stack of papers. It was probably nothing, but my paranoia was on high alert. I zoomed in as much as I could. The image was grainy, the text impossible to read, but I could make out a logo at the top of the page. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. A few days later, another photo. This one was a candid shot of Mark at his desk, pretending to be engrossed in his work. "So proud of my brilliant man, always closing deals," the caption read. Again, there were documents on the desk. I zoomed in. This time I could just make out a few words. Westlake Property Group. My blood ran cold. That was the name of my property management company. The one Mark had set me up with 5 years ago. Why would my rental paperwork be on his personal desk in his penthouse? It made no sense. A seed of suspicion, small and dark, began to take root in my mind. The arrangement he'd called cleaner suddenly felt incredibly dirty. I tried to push the feeling down, telling myself I was being paranoid, driven crazy by jealousy and resentment. But I couldn't shake the image of that logo. I decided to start with something simple. I wanted to get a clear picture of my own financial situation, to see just how dependent on Mark I truly was. My goal was to save up enough to move, to finally sever that last crucial tie. I pulled my credit report for the first time in years, expecting it to be average, maybe a little thin. What I saw made my stomach drop. My score was abysmal. There were multiple late payment notifications, all linked to my current address. Rent payments. According to the report, my rent had been late 4 times in the last 18 months. Each time it was paid a few weeks later, along with a hefty late fee. I had never received a single notice. Not a letter, not an email, not a phone call. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Mark had been paying late, letting it damage my credit, and then covering it up by paying the fees. He never said a word. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number for Westlake Property Group. I'd only ever spoken to them once years ago, to set up my renter's insurance. A clipped, impersonal voice answered. Westlake Properties. Hi, my name is Chloe Larson. I'm a tenant at 1500 Barton Springs Road. I just pulled my credit report, and I'm seeing some late rent payments I was never made aware of. I wanted to understand why I was never notified. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Ma'am, our records show that notices were sent to the primary account holder. I'm the tenant, I said, confused. Shouldn't I be the primary account holder? No, ma'am, the woman said, her tone suggesting I was an idiot. The account is held by ML Development. All correspondence goes to their office. Our records show the overdue balances were always rectified. Is there an issue with your tenancy? ML Development. Mark's company. He hadn't just been paying the rent. The lease wasn't even in my name. It was in his company's name. I was living in a corporate apartment, a line item on his business expenses. I wasn't a tenant, I was an asset. No, I managed to choke out. No, there's no issue. I hung up the phone, the world tilting on its axis. He had insulated me completely. He controlled the roof over my head, and he was secretly, systematically documenting a history of my financial irresponsibility. Every late payment was another nail in my coffin, another piece of evidence he could use against me if I ever stepped out of line. The full, terrifying scope of his power settled over me like a shroud. He had the money, the lawyers, a network of powerful friends in Austin, and a 5-year paper trail designed to prove I was an unstable, incompetent mother. If I fought him, he wouldn't just win. He would annihilate me. He would take my son. The helplessness was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was trapped, and the worst part was, I had willingly walked into the cage and thanked him for it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. Leo had a soccer game, and in the morning rush, he'd forgotten his cleats. I promised I'd drop them off at Mark's house before he had to leave for the field. I hated going to his house, a monstrous glass and steel box perched on a cliff overlooking the city. It was everything he'd ever wanted, and a constant, glaring reminder of the life I had rejected. I pulled up the long, winding driveway and parked behind his black Porsche. I figured I'd just leave the cleats on the doorstep, but as I got out of the car, I heard his voice coming from the back patio. The floor-to-ceiling glass doors slid open to catch the breeze. He was on the phone, his voice loud and confident. I froze, hidden by a large decorative agave plant. No, she has no idea. She's completely in the dark, he was saying, and he let out a short, barking laugh. My stomach clenched. He had to be talking about me. I crept closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Tiffany's voice murmured something I couldn't hear. Then Mark spoke again, his words clear and sharp in the still afternoon air. She's trapped, Tiff. Completely. The apartment, the car, it's all tied to the ML corporate accounts. It's a business expense. If she ever tried to take me to court for more support, my lawyers would bury her. They'd paint her as a gold digger living off a corporate subsidy. He paused, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. And with her credit history? No one would ever rent to her. A judge would see her as a charity case. I'd get full custody of Leo in a heartbeat. She thinks that rent check is me being generous. She has no idea it's the leash that keeps her right where I want her. A charity case. A leash. The words echoed in my head, cold and brutal. All the confusion, all the fear, all the hurt I'd been feeling for weeks suddenly evaporated, replaced by something else. A chilling, crystalline clarity. The man I had loved, the father of my child, saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be controlled. He wasn't protecting his son, he was leveraging him. He hadn't built me a safety net, he had engineered my ruin. I looked down at the soccer cleats in my hand, bright green and covered in a light dusting of dirt from Leo's last game. I thought of my son, his innocent face, his absolute trust in me. And in that moment, standing in the shadow of the mansion built on lies, the vulnerability I'd felt for so long hardened into something unbreakable. It became rage. It became resolve. He thought I was a charity case. He thought I was trapped in his prison. He was about to find out that I was the one holding the key. I wasn't going to just escape. I was going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. I quietly placed the cleats on the doorstep, got back in my car, and drove away, a plan already beginning to form in the icy stillness of my heart. The war had been declared, and I was finally ready to fight. The first step was to play the part he'd cast me in. I needed him to believe I was weak, beaten, and desperate. The next time he called, I didn't fight back. I was apologetic, meek. "You were right, Mark," I whispered into the phone, injecting a pathetic tremor into my voice. "I was out of line at the party. I'm so sorry. I was just emotional. It won't happen again." He bought it completely. His tone shifted from aggressive to condescendingly magnanimous. "It's all right, Chloe. I know you're under a lot of stress." "I am," I said, laying it on thick. "I was thinking, maybe I should get a part-time job. Something to contribute, you know? So I'm not so reliant on you." It was the perfect bait. He loved the idea. It fed his ego, reinforcing his narrative of me as the struggling, incompetent woman-child who needed his guidance. "That's a great idea, Chloe. A really mature step," he said, practically purring. "Something in retail, maybe? Or a receptionist job. Nothing too demanding." He was so blinded by his own arrogance, he couldn't see the Trojan horse I was wheeling through his gates. That part-time job became my cover. It gave me a reason to be on my laptop for hours, to be making phone calls, to be networking. He thought I was filling out applications for minimum-wage jobs at the Domain. In reality, I was becoming an expert in corporate espionage. My first target was Westlake Property Group. It had a generic website and a P.O. box in a high-end mail center, but no physical address. Using Texas Public Business filing records, which are surprisingly easy to access online, I looked up the company's registration. It was an LLC, and the registered agent, the person legally responsible for the company, it wasn't Mark. It was his father, Robert Lanning. My blood ran colder still. This wasn't just Mark's scheme. It was a family operation. The landlord I was paying rent to was my son's own grandfather. The payments weren't going to a third party. They were being funneled directly back into the Lanning family's financial ecosystem. I started digging into ML Development, Mark's flagship company. I spent nights poring over public records of his development deals, zoning permits, and investor prospectuses. It was like learning a foreign language, but I was a desperate and motivated student. I noticed a pattern. For his last 3 major luxury condo projects, there was a significant capital investor listed that I didn't recognize. An entity called CL Properties, LLC. The name stopped me in my tracks. My initials are CL Chloe Larson. It could be a coincidence, I told myself. A sick, twisted coincidence. But I knew Mark. He was arrogant. He loved inside jokes, little displays of his own cleverness. This felt like him. It felt like him hiding something in plain sight. I used a portion of my carefully hidden emergency savings, money I'd siphoned off from the child support checks for years, just in case, to pay for a comprehensive background search on CL Properties. The report came back a week later, and when I opened the file, I felt the floor drop out from under me. CL Properties, LLC was registered as a trust. Specifically, it was the beneficiary of a trust established for a minor. The name of the minor was Leo Mark Lanning. My son. My 6-year-old son was the owner of an LLC that was investing millions of dollars into his father's real estate ventures. My mind reeled, struggling to connect the dots. Mark had created a trust for Leo, which was normal for wealthy parents. But he had then used that trust to create a shell company, and he was using that shell company as a primary investor in his own projects. What did it mean? I wasn't an accountant, but I knew enough to know this was deeply, deeply wrong. This wasn't just about controlling me anymore. This was bigger. This was a sophisticated financial shell game, and he had placed our son at the very center of it, with me as the unwitting front. My address, the one he was so generously paying for, was likely the official address for the trust. He had made me the guardian of a massive criminal enterprise without my knowledge. He hadn't just put me in a cage. He'd built the cage out of evidence that could send me to prison. The pieces were there, but I didn't know how to assemble them. I needed a professional. I needed someone who could see the whole picture and tell me exactly what kind of monster I was dealing with. Finding a forensic accountant who was discreet and affordable was a challenge. I finally found a woman named Anya Sharma who operated a small, independent firm out of a nondescript office building in North Austin. She was a former IRS investigator, a small, sharp woman with eyes that missed nothing. I sat across from her desk, my hands trembling as I laid out the documents I'd gathered. The corporate filings for Westlake and CL Properties, my credit report, the public records of Mark's deals. I told her the whole story, from the birthday party to the overheard phone call. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, just looking at the papers. "Mr. Lanning is either very stupid or he thinks everyone else is," she said finally, her voice calm and even. "This is a classic tax evasion and money laundering scheme, Ms. Larson. And it's shockingly bold." Anya explained it to me in simple terms. Mark was likely hiding income. He would take cash payments or kickbacks from contractors, or overinflate his project costs and pocket the difference. That dirty money couldn't just be deposited into his bank account. It would raise red flags. So he funneled it into his son's trust, CL Properties. From there, the clean money could be invested back into his own company, ML Development, disguised as legitimate investment capital. It was a closed loop, designed to wash his illegal profits. And where did I fit in? The rent payments were the linchpin. By creating a paper trail of paying for my apartment and car through his company, he was creating legitimate-looking expenses. These expenses could be used to justify the movement of money. Even more sinister, by having the lease held by his father's shell company, he was essentially paying himself. He could inflate the rent to whatever he wanted, write it off as a business expense, and the money would never leave the family. "He's implicated you," Anya said, her gaze steady and serious. "Your address is the nexus. Your name is on the utilities. You are the guardian of the trust's beneficiary. If the IRS were to investigate, they wouldn't start with him. They would start with you." The blood drained from my face. It was his masterpiece. The perfect crime, with the perfect scapegoat already in place. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the scapegoat. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "how do we burn him to the ground?" Anya Sharma allowed herself a small, thin smile. "We give the IRS a roadmap." For the next month, Anya and I worked in secret. She guided me on exactly what to look for, what documents to get. I became a master of social engineering. I used Leo as my excuse. I'd call Mark's office, feigning confusion over some paperwork for Leo's school or doctor. While his assistant was distracted, I'd sweet-talk a junior accountant into emailing me a past invoice or a payment confirmation, claiming I needed it for my records. Each document was a small victory, another piece of the mosaic of his fraud. The most crucial piece of evidence came from Mark himself. I played the part of the dutiful co-parent, calling him to discuss summer camps for Leo. I made sure to record the call, knowing Texas was a one-party consent state. I casually brought up my finances, sighing about how I was struggling to save anything. "Don't you worry about that," he said, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. "That's what I'm here for. The rent, the car, it's all taken care of. Think of it as a bonus from the company. It's a drop in the bucket, and frankly, moving that money around through the business accounts helps keep our tax burden manageable. It's a win-win." He had just confessed to tax evasion on a recorded line. He had handed me the sword, and I knew exactly where I was going to stick it. The final act was set for the Austin Real Estate Council's annual awards gala. It was the biggest night of the year for the city's developers, a black-tie affair held in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. And this year, the guest of honor, the recipient of the coveted Developer of the Year award, was Mark Lanning. Tiffany had been posting about it for weeks, showing off her dress, the custom jewelry, the tablescapes. It was to be their coronation as Austin's new power couple. It was going to be their public execution. Getting a ticket was my first hurdle, but years of living in Mark's world had left me with a few dormant contacts. A former friend who now worked in PR for a major commercial brokerage owed me a favor. I called her, claimed I was doing freelance event photography, and needed a press pass. She didn't ask any questions. Anya and I prepared the package. A USB drive containing a meticulously organized dossier. The corporate filings, the bank statements from CL Properties we'd managed to subpoena through a legal backdoor Anya knew, a spreadsheet tracing the flow of money, and the audio file of Mark's confession. We also drafted an anonymous, detailed email to the head of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in Texas, and to a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist at the Austin American-Statesman I knew would be covering the gala. The night of the event, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the humiliated woman from the park anymore. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, something I'd owned for years. I didn't want to look like I was trying to compete with Tiffany. I wanted to look like I didn't have to. I slipped into the ballroom and took a position near the back, by the audiovisual booth. The room was a sea of tuxedos and sequins, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and mutual self-congratulation. I saw them at the head table. Mark, preening in his tuxedo, and Tiffany, dazzling in a gown of shimmering gold, clinging to his arm. They looked invincible. They were laughing, accepting congratulations from a revolving door of sycophants. They had no idea the Reaper was standing in the back of the room, wearing a press pass and holding a USB drive. I waited. I watched the presentations, the boring speeches, the forced applause. Finally, the moment came. The president of the council took the stage to announce the Developer of the Year. A slickly produced tribute video played on the massive screens flanking the stage, full of dramatic shots of Mark's buildings set to soaring orchestral music. Mark took the stage to a standing ovation. He kissed Tiffany, shook the presenter's hand, and stepped up to the podium, basking in the spotlight. "Wow," he began, that familiar, charming smile plastered on his face. "I'm humbled. Truly." He thanked his mentors, his team, his father. Then he looked directly at Tiffany. "And to my incredible partner, Tiffany. Your support and belief in me have been my rock. This is our victory." As the applause swelled, I made my move. Just as I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times, I hit send on the emails. The packages were delivered. Then, I walked calmly and purposefully toward the A/V booth. I approached the technician, a young man who looked bored out of his mind. I held up the USB drive. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady. "I'm with Mr. Lanning's office. There was a last-minute addition to the presentation. He asked me to give you this. Just play the file named final_presentation. He was too tired to argue. He just nodded, took the drive, and plugged it into his laptop. On stage, Mark was raising his glass for a toast. "To the future of Austin," he declared. And on the giant screens behind him, the tribute video vanished. It was replaced by the first slide of my presentation. It was the incorporation document for CL Properties, LLC, with my son's name listed as the sole member. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Mark's smile froze. Tiffany's face was a mask of confusion. The slide changed. It was a bank statement for CL Properties, showing a balance of over $4 million. The murmuring grew louder. Mark was staring at the screen, his face turning ashen. Then the third slide appeared. It was just a black screen with an audio waveform. And then his own voice filled the grand ballroom, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. That rent, the car, it's all taken care of. Think of it as a bonus from the company. Moving that money around through the business accounts helps keep our tax burden manageable. It's a win-win. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Every eye in the room was on Mark, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure horror. In the back, I saw the journalist I'd emailed looking down at his phone, his eyes wide, before he started typing furiously. I didn't wait to see the rest. I didn't need to. I turned my back on the silent ballroom, on the smoldering wreckage of Mark's life, and walked out into the cool Texas night, breathing free air for the first time in years. 6 months later, the world was a different place. I sat on the floor of our new apartment, a small but sunny one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood far from the ghosts of my old life. It was entirely mine. My name was on the lease, and I paid the rent myself with the money I earned from my new job. A real job, at a marketing firm that valued my mind. Leo was building a tower with his Legos, humming to himself, blissfully unaware of the storm his father had unleashed. The local news was on the TV in the background, the volume low. A business reporter was giving an update on the ML development scandal. Mark had been indicted on multiple counts of tax fraud and money laundering. His assets were frozen, his company in ruins. His father was also under investigation. Tiffany had disappeared from social media the day after the gala, her accounts scrubbed clean, as if she'd never existed. Mark had tried to fight, of course. His high-priced lawyers had tried to paint me as a vindictive ex, a scorned woman out for revenge. But the evidence Anya and I had compiled was irrefutable. The audio recording was the nail in his coffin. He had convicted himself with his own arrogant words. I looked at Leo, his face a study in concentration, as he carefully placed a small blue brick on top of his teetering tower. He was happy. He was safe. That's all that had ever mattered. The tower collapsed, and he giggled, starting to build it again without a moment's hesitation. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I had my son, I had my freedom, and I had my name back. Mark had built an empire using my son's name, and my silence as his foundation. He thought he was untouchable, that his web of lies and power made him a king. But a foundation built on deceit is just sand. All it takes is one person willing to kick it over to bring the whole thing crashing down. He built his empire on my name, so I just signed it back over to the people he stole it from. The end.